The situation with bishop d3 variation was serious enough, but unfortunately for black, this is not the end of the story. The problem arises for black when white realized that he can save the tempo, and instead of bishop d3, white started to use this precious time for advancing the case with h2, h4. One of the early prominent games in the whole line was played between Anand and Kasparov. And if we look at the position, we will understand a little bit what I'm talking about. Here, instead of bishop d3, white uses the tempo for playing h4. In a way, this is the similar idea that we already know from dragon variation, because the bishop on f1 actually is the piece that can be used possibly not only on the diagonal f1 a6, but also on the diagonal f1 h3. And from h3, the bishop would attack a very sensitive and a crucial square for the whole variation, and that's the pawn e6. On the other hand, bishop on f1 is making the advance g4, g5 a little bit more difficult since the rooks are not connected. But this can be rectified by the timely bishop g2, bishop d3 or bishop a3 moves. Black played b4. And this b4 idea is a little bit unpleasant for white. Knight on c3 in Sicilian plays a very important role, and when he has to relocate, it's often difficult to decide what is the best square. The options are knight b1, knight a4, or knight c3, e2. And in this early game, Anand decided to jump with knight to b1. Of course, this move has advantages. The king on c1 becomes safer, and it's not so easy to get closer to white king now, even if black should possibly with queen a5, queen a2 take the pawn and try to get some counterattack. On the other hand, the knight on b1 is extremely passive piece, and the queen will have to relocate from d2 in order to enable knight to take part in the game at all. And this important feature that the knight is out of play was used by Kasparov very masterfully. He played d5. And after bishop a3, the first big crisis of the game has arisen. The crisis is connected with the fact that now after bishop a3, the advance g5 and g6 would be extremely strong. Black's response with g5 is in a way shocking. I mean, that's a real surprise. On the other hand, that's a fantastic spanner in the works for white, because if white has to take on g5, well, say take twice, he certainly won't be able to realize his main idea of advancing g4, g5 very quickly. And in the meantime, black can use the time he won for advancing his case in the center. Well, we shouldn't forget that the pawn on e4 is hanging, by the way. So now Anand took on g5 and took on d5 because he didn't want to face d takes e4. After knight d5, bishop g5, queen b6, Kasparov has won some time. And this time is very useful, or very important from the point of view that he may develop the bishop from f8, he may play rook c8, and so on, and he may get counterplay on the queen side, because by definition, it doesn't have to be the black king who is only attacked. It can be also the white king safely sitting on c1. After bishop g2, rook h1, bishop h1, rook c8, we see the black pieces, the remaining black pieces are certainly playing, if not to the maximum strength, certainly they can't complain about the situation. And after rook e1, attacking e6, well, if not with a pawn, at least with pieces, Black played queen a5, attacking a2 pawn. Of course, by material balance, it is quite possible that even black will be better. So white said, okay, there is no point in defending a2 pawn. And with f4, of course, Anand was planning to storm e6 point. The pawn that we have proclaimed is the key cornerstone of the whole defense in Scheveningen. Now, after queen a2, f5, the second big crisis is on the board. And now black had to calculate properly. He plays knight b5, hoping to use the semi-open c-file and possible jumps with a knight to d3 or b3 for some real counterplay. After f takes e6, surprisingly, black is not taking back, because that's only giving tempo to the aggressor, but he plays bishop g7, and after bishop g7 it becomes obvious that white has to play very efficiently and very forcefully, otherwise he will have to face the problems of bishop d4, knight b3, and all that. And well, the knight from d4 can't even jump away because b2 pawn is hanging. So after check, king f7, bishop d5, one of the pesky knights in the center disappeared, and after queen d5, rook e7, king g8, we can see that the position is still very highly charged. White is only pawn up, and unfortunately his knight that jumped from c3 to b1 is still located on b1, and that's a great disadvantage. Now, after rook g7, white at least managed to play very interesting combination. Knight c3 deserved 2 exclamation marks in the note, because after b takes c3, knight f5, finally it's possible to equalize, more or less, by taking most of the pieces of the board. Unfortunately, this endgame is still quite difficult for white. I mean, it's very close to be drawish, but black in the next phase of the game managed to win this game. This problem, of course, doesn't belong to the discussion about Scheveningen, but it shows interesting ideas. Black played, Kasparov managed to play very forcefully, and he combined defense and attack in a masterful way. The next game is also very interesting, and well, it shows some progress. Anand is playing again with white, and he decided to use a different retreat this time. After h4, the position that we had in the previous game, b4, he refrained from playing knight b1 and decided that is too passive, and instead jumped back to e2 with knight from c3, hoping to use the knight on the king's side, maybe with knight g3, or sometimes even knight f4, and well, additional attack on the squares e6 and g6 might be unpleasant. On the other hand, the knight on e2 is obstructing bishop, the impact of the bishop f1. c4 square is not under control, and black can certainly use the time won with retreat of the knight for d5. That's a very typical advance in the center. After bishop h3, we have the similar problem as in the previous game. White is ready to sacrifice quite a lot, and he wants to advance g5, g6, storm the position, and break through on e6. In this game, black decided to take on e4, and after g5, this very highly charged position was played several times, and of course was also analyzed by both players before the games. And here black uses his time, because he doesn't have to retreat with the knight from f6, he can attack the opponent's piece by taking on f3. After taking on f3, white truly jump to f4. Now we see the crisis, the real catastrophe on e6 is next to impossible to avert, because white is simply heading with too many pieces towards e6, so there will be something will happen on e6. Fortunately, black has one more move with knight e4, where he can attack the queen on d2, and after queen e1, Anand proclaims, okay, this is the maximum that black was able to achieve in the short time that he had before the catastrophe strikes, catastrophe with g5, g6, or knight takes e6. Black decided to insert this beautiful move f2, and after bishop f2, queen g5, he won yet another respite, and the respite is connected with the fact that on the diagonal c1, h6, the queen is pinning the knight on f4. Unfortunately, after bishop e3, the main logic of the game is still there, and the pawn on e6 is as weak as it always was. So in this position, queen h4 looks very logical, because in the crisis, in the impending crisis, it would be very useful to get rid of the white queen. And it's not so easy to find a good square for the white queen from e1. Unfortunately, it's possible to attack in the chess also without queens on the board. So the logical and the move that was in preparation for quite some time, knight e6, was played here. Black decided to take on e1, and now comes the main trick, main idea. Knight takes g7. Knight takes g7 is, of course, a tactical resource, because if black takes on g7, white is able to interpose with bishop d7 and only then take on e1, saving all the pieces for attack and getting somewhat better position. Black probably didn't solve the problems of this position in the best way. Bishop g7 should have been preferred, but king d8 is a sophisticated attempt, because now, of course, bishop d7 is not played with check, and also rook d7 is not possible because there is still a queen on e1. So after the logical rook e1, we see that for the moment there are two pieces hanging, knight on g7, knight on d7, and black played king d8 in order to be able to interpose with rook h3, destroying the main attacker, or one of the pesky attackers on h3. After knight h3, bishop g7, he even, nominally speaking, has achieved some material advantage. Unfortunately, after knight g5, the problem connected with coordination of black pieces is quite visible, and we see that if he takes on g5, bishop g5 opens up all the access of all the pieces to the black position. That would not be the best idea. And once again, there must be a better way than king e8, because after king e8, seemingly, daring move, because now when the bishop from e3 goes away, black has f5, connecting all his pieces, supporting the knight on e4. Unfortunately, there is a small combination, knight f7, and with this last pawn of the king's side goes also the hope for black to get his house in order and, to connect all the pieces. Now, after knight e5, it only shows that even a strong player like Belyavsky finds it difficult to master such a complicated position, and of course defense is always more difficult than attack. After knight d6, rook d6, it becomes obvious that the pieces can't really be well connected. There is a threat of bishop d4 or bishop f4, and after king f8, comes yet another interesting, witty idea, bishop h6, and bishop h6, rook h6, knight f7, rook b6, rook b4. We have reached the key position, the introduction to the real endgame, and this endgame has to be judged as very difficult or probably lost for black, because in this position white has not only rook for two light pieces, for black pieces, but he has potentially two connected pass pawns on the queen side, and it should be fairly easy for him to convert the advantage into the whole point. And he duly won the game later on. The next game shows that white was still slightly disappointed with the retreats knight b1 or knight e2, and actually currently the only retreat that has any popularity, that has any following, is knight a4. So in the famous position that we already have seen twice in this chapter, after h4, b4, white chooses knight a4. Of course, this is not the desirable square for the knight, because the knight on a4 is cut off from his own army. The prospect of jumping to b6 and c5 is very limited. On the other hand, the knight on a4 could become very useful in the defense, because white is ready, after, say, queen a5, which is a typical move, is ready to play b3, support the knight on a4, and, well, then use the rest of his army for the active play. And, well, any slowing down of potential black's counterplay is very welcome. And on the other hand, the knight on a4 has a life on his own and limits the options for black as well. Black played d5, just a very standard, normal idea, normal variation. And after bishop a3 in the game Kasparov Fun Valley, black used g5 in analogy with the first game that we have seen in this chapter. Fun Valley used g5 that Kasparov played against Anand. So in a way, indirectly, white had to fight against his own idea, against his own child. After bishop g2, we see that white is solving the problem of tension on the king's side in a different way. Anand, in the first game that we have seen, has taken twice on g5, but after bishop g2, the challenge for black is not very pleasant, because now h-take g5 would win on the spot, more or less, and black can't really solve the tension on g5 satisfactorily. Fun Valley decided to take on h4, and after rook h4, of course, it took some knowledge and some preparation to see that, for instance, knight e4 is not the good move, the move that would be solving all the problems for black, because in this position, white is playing without some material, but the queen on h4 is seemingly active piece, but on the other hand, most of the black forces are still sitting in their original positions, and white will break through in a direct attack. So that's not a feasible variation. That's why black decided, Fun Valley decided to take on e4, and after e4 comes g5. So in a clever way, Kasparov achieved his main goal, and g5, of course, attacks the knight on f6, but that's not the main idea. We know the main idea. The main idea is to get access to the e6 square, to the e6 point, and when with e6, or the structure f7, e6, if this gets destroyed, then the whole position may fall apart for black. Black played knight d5, and now rook e4. The access of the rook from h1 to e4 is very original and, of course, very unpleasant for black, because now, additionally to the main threat g6, white can also contemplate knight e6 and, well, all kinds of sacrifices on e6. Black decided to take on g5, which is a mistake, and after bishop g5, queen a5, now we can see that this is I would say, ideal position for Kasparov, who decided to abandon his knight on a4 and use the precious time for f4 and advance of his case, the attack against e6. If black now takes on a4 instead of rook h2, that happened in the game, now the knight e6 would work. And this position shows that, well, white is breaking through. Well, the next move is bishop c6, and simply the knight on d7 will fall. The whole position falls apart, and so the only move is knight c5. And, well, this position shows that white has material advantage, and not only that, but in this moment the number of pieces is equal. But white has two extra pawns and a ferocious attack. This is just a lost position. So Van Velde had to play very creatively, inventively. He decided to slow down white's progress with rook h2. Unfortunately, after rook h2, the key idea of knight e6 already works. And here, after rook f7, king f7, fortunately for black, white is unable to take on d5 or use his bishop very actively, but there is a beautiful move that created or guaranteed that this game will be remembered for a long time. Kasparov was in his middle and he played queen d3. Queen d3 is, of course, logical. Move connected with sacrificing quite a few pieces. I mean, objectively speaking, now white sacrifices or leaves on at least three pieces: knight on a4, bishop on g2, and rook on e6. But on the other hand, there is a threat of mate in one. Queen g6 is quite powerful and very difficult to address. So if now, for instance, black takes on e6, that's a variation that is probably the most beautiful. White has queen g6, and after knight f6, bishop d5, queen f6, king d7, rook d5. The fireworks work perfectly for white, and after knight b6, it's obvious that white is winning the house. I mean, he will not only be materially ahead, but he keeps all his attacking pieces, and, well, this is simply unplayable for black, so that wouldn't have been possible. That's why black decided to play bishop g7, but after queen f5, rook d5, all the white pieces are playing to their maximum, and rook d5 is, of course, even stronger than bishop d5 move, and white pieces are simply getting closer and closer to the black king. After queen a4, rook e7, it became obvious that the king is only defended by one piece, by bishop on g7, and that's not enough against many white pieces that are trying or hoping to get closer to him. This brilliant game showed that it won't be easy for black to face knight a4, and we have the final game that I wanted to show you is example of another beautiful idea that white can use in these type of positions. After b4, knight a4, which became a standard, Zhang Pengxiang against Lea Mi in 2004 decided to repeat the pattern, to use the pattern that we already know, knight a4 and bishop a3, and after taking on e4, g5, black decided that he will try to survive with a special special idea. The idea is to ignore the threat to the knight on f6. Instead, black concentrates on grabbing as many pawns as possible, and well, we know that it's quite possible to play even with material imbalance. If white will get the piece, black can have 3 pawns as a compensation, and if he manages to get his house in order and to play with his pieces actively, he may certainly compete with his opponent nearly on equal terms. Unfortunately, the Chinese players usually have a fantastic tactical vision, and white was well prepared for this development, and he played, instead of taking on f6, he played fantastic idea, knight e6, well, which in itself is not so surprising, because we know all kinds of threats and blows against the e6 are typical for this variation, or for the Scheveningen in general. But after f takes e6, he played ingenious move bishop f5. I mean, this is one of the wittiest ideas that you can see in this type of position, or in this very position, because now black had to take on f5. Unfortunately for him, taking on h1 simply loses, because white will play bishop g6, king e7, and now the triumph of the spirit over the sheer material is complete, because after queen d6 we see a beautiful shortcut to happiness for white. I mean, he managed to kill the black king just by destroying the shield f7 e6. So after bishop f5, it's simply necessary to take on f5, and after rook h8, suddenly white's rook, by a small miracle, by a tactical wit, have landed on h8, attacking or potentially attacking bishop on f8. The other rook is on d1, so the black defense becomes very charged, and after knight g4, even the knight, the modest knight on a5 is taking active part. So after knight c5, black felt compelled to take on c5, and after the exchange on d8 and rook f8, king d7, bishop c5, we see that actually white is materially ahead, and black had to defend the pawn on f5, otherwise rook f5 wins on the spot. And now after king d2, again we have landed in one of the endings that is, unfortunately, in this line usually not so favorable for black, because typically he usually loses some material on the way, and this still takes some doing, but white duly won the position with his pair exchange, and converted his advantage to the full point.